Welcome to the Velvet Armchair Mysteries. I'm Alistair Gray, and tonight we're slipping back to 1927, London, fog thick as velvet curtains, and the grand opening of the brand new Celeste Hotel in Mayfair. If you're curled up with a cuppa in Manchester, a blanket in Mumbai, or, dare I say, sneaking this in the office in Melbourne, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Your little notes light up my week. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let Monsieur Hercule Poirot do what he does best. Chapter 1. Introduction and Setup. The fog that draped London on the evening of 14th October 1927 was not the honest yellow pea souper of legend, but a sly opalescent veil that turned street lamps into blurred moons and made every taxi headlight a wandering comet. It crept along Bruton Street, curled around the wrought-iron balconies of the newly finished Celeste Hotel, and slipped through the revolving doors as though it had been invited to the grand opening gala. The Celeste was 7 stories of alabaster and ambition. Its facade, Portland stone veined with rose, had been polished until it glowed like the inside of a seashell. Above the entrance, a frieze of nymphs danced beneath a gilded crescent moon. Inside, the lobby unfolded in a hush of lapis lazuli marble, and mirrors framed in lapis lazuli again, so that every guest appeared to step into infinity. A fountain shaped like a silver lotus murmured at the centre, its water scented faintly with bergamot. Crystal chandeliers, imported from Murano and hung with 1,000 teardrops, shivered whenever the orchestra in the Palm Court struck a bold chord. Tonight, the orchestra played Les Has, and the chandeliers shivered often. At precisely 6:45, a Rolls-Royce Phantom the Faille, its paintwork the colour of midnight peonies, purred to a halt beneath the hotel's porte-cochere. The commissionaire, ex-guardsman, medals discreet beneath his braid, snapped open the door with the precision of a rifle bolt. Out stepped Mrs. Evelyn Hargreaves, 28 years old, newly married, and already famous for the way she wore clothes, as though they had been invented for her alone. Tonight it was a gown of silk crêpe de chine, midnight peonies again, cut on the bias so that it clung and released with every breath. At her throat blazed the sapphire necklace that had made the society pages from Biarritz to Baden-Baden, 37 stones, each the size of a pigeon's egg, insured for £40,000, and rumoured to have belonged to a Romanov Grand Duchess, who lost her head in more ways than one. Evelyn paused beneath the awning, lifted her face to the mist, and laughed. A low, delighted sound that made the commissionaire forget his stiff upper lip for half a heartbeat. Then she glided inside, leaving behind the faint perfume of tuberose and the memory of that laugh echoing against marble. Upstairs, in the sapphire suite on the 6th floor, her husband waited. Mr. Reginald Hargreaves, 58, shipping magnate, collector of Ming porcelain and Renaissance bronzes, widower of one wife and newly wed to another, was knotting his white tie for the 3rd time. The mirror above the Louis XV commode reflected a man who had everything, and suspected he might soon have less. His hair, once the colour of wet sand, had silvered at the temples. His eyes, once the keen blue of the North Atlantic, had clouded with the calculations of a man who had survived 3 bankruptcies and 1 torpedoing. He tugged the tie, frowned, and reached for the decanter of Amontillado on the Boulay writing desk. The sapphire suite was the hotel's crowning glory. Walls panelled in sycamore, dyed the colour of twilight. A bed vast enough for a coronation, and a bathroom where the taps were solid gold dolphins that spouted hot and cold at the twist of a fin. French windows opened onto a balcony no wider than a chessboard, overlooking the courtyard 6 stories below. The balcony rail was wrought iron, painted white, and decorated with celestial motifs, stars, moons, comets, because the architect had been reading his Ovid. Between the windows hung a tapestry of Persephone gathering flowers, the threads so fine they seemed to breathe. Reginald poured 2 fingers of sherry, raised the glass to his reflection, and spoke to it as though it were an old adversary. "To us, old man, and to the Celeste, may she float as proudly as my ships." He did not drink. Instead, he set the glass beside its twin, already poured for Evelyn, and crossed to the door. Habit from years at sea. He turned the key in the Yale lock, then slid the brass bolt across. The bolt was heavy, Victorian, the kind that announced its presence with a satisfactory snick. Only then did he allow himself a small, private smile. Down in the lobby, the orchestra slid into a languorous waltz. Couples swirled beneath the chandeliers like bright fish in a gilded bowl. At the cloakroom, a young man in immaculate evening dress handed over a camel hair coat and received a brass token shaped like a crescent moon. Percival Blaine, 23, fair hair slicked back with macassar oil, type in a ruby the size of a wren's egg, paused to admire his reflection in one of the infinity mirrors. He looked, he decided, exactly like a man who ought to inherit £12 million. The fact that his uncle's marriage had reduced that sum to a mere allowance of £5,000 a year was a detail he preferred not to dwell upon. Percy pocketed the token, accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, and began to calculate how many more he could drink before the speeches. Near the fountain, Captain Marcus Denham stood with the rigid stillness of a man who had spent too long on parade grounds. His dinner jacket strained across shoulders, broadened by years of hauling ropes and saluting admirals. A scar, thin, pale souvenir of a Turkish bayonet, bisected his left eyebrow. In his left hand, he clutched a battered leather dispatch case. In his right, a glass of whiskey he had not tasted. His eyes, storm grey, scanned the room with the methodical sweep of a periscope. Every so often, they snagged on the grand staircase, as though expecting someone to descend who had not yet arrived. At the reception desk, Miss Lydia Frost signed the register with a fountain pen that scratched like an angry cat. Her handwriting was small, precise, the hand of a woman who had typed 10,000 business letters and resented everyone. She wore grey silk, severe but expensive, and a single string of pearls that looked real but were not. Her auburn hair was pinned in a knot so tight it might have been welded. When the clerk asked for her room number, she answered without looking up. 612, adjoining Mr. Hargreaves's suite. The clerk's eyebrows rose a fraction. Adjoining suites were rarely requested by secretaries, but he said nothing. Miss Frost closed the register, tucked the pen into her crimson leather notebook, and moved toward the lifts with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had never wasted a minute in her life. In the palm court, Madame Valentina Rossi held court beneath a potted palm, so lush it threatened to annex the neighbouring tables. She wore emeralds tonight, earrings, bracelet, a stomacher that flashed like green lightning, and a gown of chartreuse velvet that left her shoulders bare. Her voice, even in conversation, carried the vibrato of the stage. She was telling a rapt circle of dowagers about the night in Naples when Reginald Hargreaves had thrown a Ming vase at her head and missed. "Of course I kept the vase," she concluded, sipping champagne through a straw to preserve her lipstick. It is worth more with the chip." Laughter rippled. No one noticed the way her eyes, black, brilliant, unreadable, flicked toward the staircase every time the lift bell pinged. Dr. Felix Armitage arrived last, stepping from a taxicab with the weary grace of a man who had spent the afternoon reassuring a duchess that her heart palpitations were not fatal. He carried a small black bag, crocodile, gold clasp, and a monocle that caught the light like a malevolent star. His evening clothes were faultless, his cuffs fastened with onyx links shaped like serpents. He paused to inhale the bergamot-scented air, murmured charming to no one in particular, and made his way to the bar. There he ordered a glass of Perrier water, no ice, no lemon, and watched the room over the rim as though diagnosing its collective ailments. At 7:15, the lifts began their evening ballet. The attendant, Tommy Price, 19, freckled, cap perched at a regulation angle, operated the brass lever with the solemnity of a priest. First to ascend was Captain Denham, dispatch case clutched to his chest. Then Miss Frost, notebook pressed to hers. Madame Rossi swept in next, trailing perfume and gossip. Dr. Armitage followed, murmuring thanks. Finally, Percy, Blaine, humming the waltz and spilling champagne on his shoes. Tommy delivered them all to the 6th floor within 90 seconds. The corridor was a tunnel of midnight blue carpet and sconces shaped like lotus buds. Only one door stood ajar, the Sapphire Suite, number 600. From within drifted the faint clink of crystal and Evelyn's laugh, brighter now, edged with champagne. Tommy closed the gate. The lift descended. The corridor fell silent. At 7:29, the lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Somewhere in the basement, a junction box sparked and died. In the lobby, the chandeliers trembled. The orchestra faltered mid-bar. A dowager clutched her pearls. 30 seconds later, the lights blazed again. The waltz resumed. No one thought to mention the flicker to the management. At 7:31, the bolt of the Sapphire Suite slid home with a soft, decisive snick. The key turned in the lock. The corridor remained empty. Downstairs, the gala gathered momentum. Waiters circulated with trays of oysters and caviar. The string quartet launched into Strauss's Blue Danube. Percy Blaine discovered a debutante with eyes like violets and a laugh like champagne. Madame Rossi accepted a second glass and began a story about Caruso. Captain Denham stood alone by the fountain, staring at the lift indicator as though it might confess. Miss Frost typed in room 612, the clack of keys muffled by the thick carpet. Dr. Armitage sipped his Perrier and watched the revolving doors. In the Sapphire Suite, Reginald Hargreaves raised his glass again. "To us, darling," he said. Evelyn smiled, touched the sapphires at her throat, and did not drink. Chapter 2. The crime discovered. The gala was in full glittering flood by 8 o'clock. The Palm Court had become a conservatory of silk and diamonds. The air shimmered with heat from the chandeliers and the sharper tang of ambition. Waiters in white gloves darted between gowns the colour of parrot wings and tailcoats stiff as armour. A gossip columnist from the Daily Sketch counted tiaras and calculated column inches. The string quartet, now reinforced by a harp, glided into a foxtrot so smooth that even the dowagers tapped patent leather toes beneath their chairs. At the long table beneath the lotus fountain, the hotel's managing director, Mr. Archibald Fortescue, rose to propose the toast. He was a thin man with a voice like a cracked bell, but champagne had oiled the hinges tonight. He lifted his glass. To the Celeste, may she rise above the fog of London as gracefully as Venus from the waves. Applause pattered like rain on a conservatory roof. Glasses chimed. Percy Blaine, 3 cocktails ahead of schedule, shouted, "Here, here," with the enthusiasm of a man who believed applause was a transferable currency. Captain Denham stood at the bar, back to the room, staring into his untouched whiskey as though it might reveal enemy shipping lanes. Madame Rossi held court near the harp, recounting again the night in Naples when the Ming vase had flown. Dr. Armitage circulated with the quiet menace of a physician who knows exactly which guest will need bicarbonate before midnight. Miss Frost was nowhere to be seen, and still no sign of Mr. and Mrs. Reginald Hargreaves. At 8:15, Percy detached himself from the violet-eyed debutante. Her name was Daphne, she was 19, and she had already decided he was a catch, and sauntered to the foot of the grand staircase. He craned his neck toward the balcony that ringed the lobby. "Uncle Reggie's probably fussing with his typing again," he announced to no one in particular. "Or Evelyn's changed gowns for the 4th time. Women, eh?" Laughter rippled. A dowager with a lorgnette tittered behind her fan. The moment passed. By 8:45, the laughter had thinned. The quartet launched into a second foxtrot. Fewer couples took the floor. Mr. Fortescue's smile had begun to calcify. He beckoned the head waiter, a dignified Spaniard named Luis, and murmured behind a menu, "Find out what's keeping Mr. Hargreaves, discreetly." Luis glided away. 2 minutes later he returned, expression unchanged but eyes flickering like a faulty bulb. "Senor Fortescue, the lift boy says the 6th floor is quiet." "Quiet is good," Fortescue snapped. "Quiet is not late." At 9 sharp, the orchestra paused for refreshments. The hush that followed was not the polite silence of anticipation, but the uneasy vacuum that precedes a storm. Guests consulted wristwatches. A debutante whispered that perhaps the Hargreaveses had eloped again. Someone shushed her. Percy, now 4 cocktails in, climbed 3 steps of the staircase and bellowed upward, "Uncle Reggie, the champagne's going flat!" His voice echoed off marble and returned unanswered. Mr. Fortescue made a decision. He signalled Tommy Price, the freckled lift attendant who had been hovering near the gates like a nervous collie. "Tommy, nip up to the Sapphire Suite, knock. If there's no answer, use the pass key, but politely. Tell Mr. Hargreaves the toast cannot wait." Tommy touched his cap and stepped into the lift. The gates clanged shut. The indicator needle crept upward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then stopped. 30 seconds passed, a full minute. The needle did not descend. In the lobby, conversation resumed in brittle fragments. Someone laughed too loudly. The harpist plucked a nervous arpeggio. At 9:10, Tommy reappeared, not in the lift, but pelting down the service stairs 2 at a time. Cap askew, face the colour of skimmed milk. He skidded to a halt in front of Fortescue. "Sir, door's locked, sir. Bolted from inside. Knocked till my knuckles bled. No answer. I looked through the transom." His voice cracked like a schoolboy's. Fortescue seized his arm. "Speak, boy! There's a body, sir. Mr. Hargreaves, on the rug, blood on his shirt. Mrs. Hargreaves, she's just—" Sitting there, staring, the words detonated. A woman screamed, "High, theatrical, Madame Rossi's range." Glasses slipped from nerveless fingers and shattered on marble. Captain Denham's whiskey finally met the floor. Percy Blaine sat down hard on the bottom step, mouth open like a landed trout. Fortescue's voice cut through the chaos with the authority of a man who had once managed a liner through a hurricane. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm. The authorities will be summoned. Captain Denham, your assistance, please." Denham moved with the automatic obedience of the quarterdeck. He barked orders. Clear the lobby, form a cordon, no one to leave. Dr. Armitage was already pushing through the crush, black bag swinging. Out of my way! Medical emergency! He reached the lift just as Tommy restarted it. The gates clanged. Upward again. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6th floor corridor was a tunnel of shadows and lotus sconces. The midnight blue carpet swallowed footsteps. Door 600 stood closed, solid oak, brass numerals gleaming. Dr. Armitage rapped with his knuckles. Mr. Hargreaves! Mrs. Hargreaves! This is Dr. Armitage. Open at once! Silence. He tried the handle. Locked. He inserted the passkey Fortescue had thrust into his hand, turned. The Yale lock clicked, but the door refused to budge. The bolt, thrown from within. Damnation, Armitage muttered. He stepped back, eyed the transom, too high. Tommy, still trembling, produced a small stepladder from the linen cupboard. Armitage climbed, monocle glinting, and peered through the narrow glass. The scene within froze the breath in his throat. Reginald Hargreaves lay on his back in the centre of the Persian rug, arms flung wide as though embracing an invisible partner. His evening shirt was pristine white, except for a small, neat hole in the centre of the chest, and a spreading crimson bloom the size of a dinner plate. His eyes stared at the ceiling, reflecting the chandelier in tiny fractured moons. No weapon in sight. 10 feet away, Evelyn Hargreaves sat in a gilt armchair, hands folded in her lap, midnight peony's gown, untouched by blood. The sapphire necklace lay coiled on the tea table like a glittering serpent that had lost interest in striking. Her face was pale but composed, lips parted as though she were about to speak and had forgotten the words. Armitage's monocle slipped. He caught it, descended the ladder, and turned to the small knot of men who had followed. Fortescue, Denham, Percy, the night porter. "He's dead," Armitage said flatly. "Gunshot centre mass. No sign of the weapon. Door bolted from inside. Mrs. Hargreaves is unharmed. Catatonic, perhaps." Percy made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Uncle Reggie? Shot? In a locked room? That's impossible." Denham's jaw tightened. "Nothing's impossible, lad. Just improbable." Fortescue's mind raced through insurance clauses and headlines. He seized control. No one enters until the police arrive. "Tommy, telephone Scotland Yard. Inspector Japp, if he's on duty. Tell him it's urgent. Denham, guard the door. Armitage, see to Mrs. Hargreaves through the transom if you can." Armitage shook his head. "She's breathing. Beyond that, I need to get in." At 9:27, the night porter returned with a crowbar from the boiler room. Denham took it, set his shoulder to the door. On 3, 1, 2. The oak splintered, the bolt sheared. The door swung inward on a hush of warm air and the faint scent of tuberose. They entered in a rush that stopped almost immediately. The room was exactly as Tommy had described. Body, blood, woman, necklace. But now the details assaulted the senses. The sherry glasses. One lipstick smudged, one untouched. The tapestry of Persephone, her woven eyes wide with eternal surprise. The French windows latched tight, curtains stirring in a draught that came from nowhere. The dumbwaiter hatch in the wall, no larger than a tea tray, closed. The ventilation grate, 8 inches square, screwed shut. Evelyn Hargreaves blinked. Slowly, as though waking from a dream, she lifted her head. "He locked the door," she said, voice husky but steady. Then the lights went out. I heard a pop, like champagne. He fell. I couldn't move. Dr. Armitage knelt beside the body, fingers probing the wound. Small caliber, through the heart, instantaneous. Percy staggered to the balcony doors, flung them open, cold fog rolled in. 6 stories below, the courtyard was a black void. No ladder, no rope, no ledge, wide enough for a cat. "Locked room," he whispered. "Bloody locked room." Captain Denham's eyes narrowed. He crossed to the dumb waiter, yanked it open. Inside, a silver tray, 2 empty cups, a crumpled napkin, nothing else. Fortescue's voice trembled. The bolt was thrown from inside. The keys still in the lock, on the inside. How did the murderer leave? No one answered. At 9:41, the lift bell pinged. Out stepped Inspector Japp, thin, harassed, overcoat buttoned wrong. And behind him, uninvited but inevitable, a small man with an egg-shaped head, a moustache waxed to rapier points, and eyes that glittered like green absinthe in the chandelier light. Hercule Poirot surveyed the scene with the mild interest of a connoisseur appraising a flawed but intriguing canvas. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, stepping delicately around the blood. "What a fuss for such a little hole!" "Inspector Japp, you will cordon the corridor, oui? And you," he pointed at Tommy, who flinched, "you will tell Poirot exactly what you saw through the transom. Every detail. Even the colour of Madame's lipstick." Japp sighed. "Poirot, this is a hotel, not a music hall. We've procedures. Procedures!" Poirot's laugh was a soft puff of air. "Procedures will not explain how a man is shot in a room locked, bolted, and watched by a boy who hears nothing. Procedures will not find the pistol that vanishes like a rabbit in a conjurer's hat. Non, Japp. We begin with the impossible. It is the only place to begin." He knelt beside Reginald Hargreaves, tweezers appearing as if by magic. From the blood he lifted a single thread, silk, midnight blue, the exact shade of the corridor carpet. "Curious," Poirot said. "The rug is Persian, crimson and gold. This thread does not belong. It has travelled, perhaps, on the shoe of the murderer." Evelyn Hargreaves spoke again, barely above a whisper. "The lights flickered just before, then the pop, then nothing." Poirot's eyes flicked to the chandelier, then to the wall switch, then to the French windows. He crossed to the balcony, leaned out. Fog swallowed the courtyard. Somewhere below, a taxi backfired. He turned back, clapping his hands once. "Bien, the stage is set, the actors assembled, the curtain rises on Act 2. But first," he smiled at the stunned assembly, "we must keep the audience in their seats. No one leaves the theatre tonight." Chapter 3. Investigation begins. The Sapphire Suite had become a stage set after the actors have fled. Lights too bright, props askew, a corpse centre stage refusing to take its bow. Hercule Poirot moved through the wreckage with the delicacy of a watchmaker handling a bomb. Inspector Japp, meanwhile, barked orders that ricocheted off the sycamore walls and died in the midnight blue carpet. "Photographer, now! Fingerprints, every surface! And someone find me a constable who isn't gawping like a tourist." 2 uniformed men appeared. Helmets tucked beneath arms, notebooks trembling. Poirot ignored them. He stood in the exact centre of the Persian rug, eyes half closed, twirling one point of his moustache as though it were a radio dial tuning to an invisible frequency. "Silence, s'il vous plaît," he murmured. "The little grey cells, they require absolute quiet." Japp rolled his eyes but obeyed. The room held its breath. Poirot opened his eyes. Green, bright, merciless. "Observe," he said, gesturing like a conductor. "We have a classic chambre close. One door, oak, Yale lock, brass bolt thrown from within. Key and lock, inside. One window, French, latched, 6 stories above courtyard. One dumb waiter, 30 inches square, hatch bolted. One ventilation grate, 8 by 8, screws intact. No chimney, no secret panel, no trapdoor. And yet—" He indicated the body with a delicate flick of wrist. "Monsieur Hargreaves is shot through the heart at close range, between 7:29 and 7:31. No weapon, no murderer, no exit. He knelt, produced a pocket lens, and examined the bolt. The brass gleamed, but beneath the lens a hairline scratch curved like a smile. "Thrown with force," he said, "but not by a dying man. Observe the angle, upward. Monsieur Hargreaves was 5'10". The bolt is at 5'8". A man falling does not reach up to secure his tomb." Dr. Armitage, who had been hovering with professional unease, cleared his throat. "Death instantaneous. Bullet entered here. He touched the crimson hole. Severed the aorta. He was dead before he hit the rug." Poirot nodded. "Précisément. So who threw the bolt after the shot?" He rose, crossed to Evelyn Hargreaves. She sat statue still, hands folded, sapphires glinting on the tea-table like a discarded crown. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "you will tell Poirot everything from the moment you entered this room." Evelyn's voice was a thread. "We arrived at 6:45. Reginald poured sherry. He locked the door. Habit from ships. Said pirates might board even in Mayfair." A ghost of a smile. At 7:28, the lights flickered. He turned to the window, thought it was lightning, then a pop, like champagne. He clutched his chest, fell. I froze. The bolt slid home. I thought he'd done it before. Before? Her voice cracked. Poirot's eyes flicked to the sherry glasses. One bore a crescent of crimson lipstick. Evelyn's shade. The other was untouched, a faint sediment at the bottom. "Digitalis?" he asked Armitage. The doctor lifted the glass, sniffed. "Possibly. Needs analysis." Japp scribbled. Poirot moved to the French windows, unlatched them. Fog rolled in, thick as wool. The balcony was a narrow iron shelf. Beyond, a drop straight to flagstones. No footprints in the dew on the rail. No rope marks. He leaned out, peered up. Nothing but blank wall and gargoyles. Down, courtyard, a single lamp, a cat picking its way across cobbles. He relatched the windows, crossed to the dumb waiter. The hatch opened with a squeal. Inside, the silver tray, 2 cups, napkin. He lifted the tray. Beneath, a faint circular stain, darker than sherry. "Blood?" Japp asked. "No, ink perhaps, or—" Poirot touched it, sniffed. "Almonds, prussic acid, curious." He closed the hatch, turned to the ventilation grate. The screws were painted over, undisturbed since installation. He tapped the wall, solid. Japp's notebook filled. "Time of death. 7:29 to 7:31, Armitage repeated. "Rigor just beginning. Temperature drop consistent." Poirot clapped once. "Bien. Now, we eliminate." He summoned the 5 suspects to the corridor, now lit by a single bare bulb that swung like an executioner's lantern. Tommy Price stood guard, cap in hands, freckles stark against pallor. First, Captain Denham. He stood at ease, but his knuckles were white on the dispatch case. Luis summoned, confirmed. 3 fingers, no water. He never left. Poirot's eyes flicked to the case. "You carry secrets, Capitaine?" Denham's jaw tightened. "Private correspondence. Nothing to do with—" Poirot waved him silent. Next. Miss Lydia Frost stepped forward, notebook clutched like a shield. Her grey silk was creased. A single auburn strand escaped its pin. The typewriter in 612 still held a sheet. Shipment delayed, Liverpool. The ribbon was fresh, the keys dusty, unused tonight. Dr. Felix Armitage adjusted his monocle. The barman remembered the Perrier water. The couple, flustered, confirmed. Percy Blaine swayed, champagne on his breath. Daphne, blushing, nodded. All alibis, on paper, held like steel. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Paper is patient. Now, we examine the impossible." He demanded the hotel blueprints. Fortescue produced them from the safe, rolls of parchment smelling of ink and ambition. Poirot spread them on the buhl desk, waiting corners with sherry glasses. The Celeste had been built on the bones of 3 Georgian townhouses. The 6th floor retained anomalies. A service staircase behind the linen cupboard, bricked up in 1925 when the lifts were installed. The dumb waiter shaft ran from kitchen to roof, with access hatches on each floor. The ventilation system connected to a central flue, too narrow for a child. Poirot's finger traced the service stair. "Sealed, oui?" Fortescue nodded. "Bricks and mortar, inspected last month." Poirot smiled. "We shall inspect again." At 11 o'clock, accompanied by Japp, a locksmith, and a sweating Fortescue, they opened the linen cupboard. Shelves of monogrammed towels. A faint smell of starch. The back wall, plaster, painted cream. The locksmith tapped, solid, then thunk, a hollow note. He chipped plaster. Bricks beneath, but the mortar was fresh, pale, crumbling. "Opened recently," he grunted. "Within weeks." They broke through. Dust billowed. Beyond, a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. On the 3rd step, an emerald earring, bright as a traffic light. Madame Rossi, summoned, gasped. "Mine! From the 2nd act of Tosca! I lost it yesterday!" Japp bagged it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A red herring, perhaps, but herrings swim in schools." They descended. The stairs emerged in the boiler room, empty, furnaces cold. A side-compiled list of clues. Poirot gathered the suspects in the sapphire suite at twilight. Rain lashed the windows, the fog had turned to water. Poirot. The crime is impossible only if we accept the room was sealed. But seals can be broken, locks picked, bolts thrown by cunning. Observe, he produced a silk cord, a hairpin. With a flick, he looped the cord around the bolt from the outside, pulled. The bolt slid home with a snick. Gasps. Poirot. A trick known to Parisian thieves, but it requires 2 things, access and time. The lights flickered at 7:29. Why? Japp checked the basement junction box. Short circuit. Wires cut clean. Razor work. Poirot nodded. Diversion. And the lift. The lift mechanic, roused from bed, reported, "Cables jammed at 7:28. 45 seconds. Someone wedged the doors on 6 with a shoe." Tommy's spare uniform shoe. Size 7, missing from stores. Poirot's voice softened. "The net tightens, but where is the pistol?" He opened the dumb waiter again. The shaft plunged 6 stories. He shone a torch. Far below, a glint of metal. "Lower me a line," he ordered. Japp obeyed. Minutes later, Poirot held a .25 Beretta, silencer of cork and cotton wool, wrapped in a napkin monogrammed C. "The pistol descends to an accomplice," Poirot said. "But who?" He turned to Evelyn. "Madame, you did not drink your sherry. Why?" Poirot lifted the untouched glass, swirled the sediment. "Digitalis, enough to stun, not kill. You were meant to sleep through your husband's murder." Evelyn's eyes widened. "I thought it was Reginald's heart." Poirot shook his head. "No, someone wished you silent." He faced the 5. "One of you unbricked the stair. One cut the wires. One jammed the lift. One fired the shot. One caught the pistol. Perhaps," his gaze swept them, "one is innocent. Perhaps none." Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. Dawn over Mayfair was the colour of watered blood. The fog had thinned to a reluctant haze, revealing the Celeste's white facade streaked with soot from overnight taxis. Inside, the lobby fountain still murmured bergamot, but the scent now mingled with the sharper tang of flash powder and the low, continuous murmur of scandal. Reporters had gathered at the revolving doors like gulls around a fishing smack. Constable Hawkins, 6'4", helmet polished to a mirror, stood guard with the stoic misery of a man who had drawn the short straw. Upstairs on the 6th floor, the Sapphire Suite had become a laboratory. Fingerprint dust ghosted every surface. The Persian rug was rolled back to reveal chalk outlines where Reginald Hargreaves had fallen. A police surgeon in a white coat knelt beside the body, dictating to a shorthand clerk. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in dove-grey spats and a waistcoat of palest lilac, moved among them like a conductor who has lost patience with the orchestra. "Non, non, non," he exclaimed, snatching a glass tube from a constable's hand. "You contaminate the sediment. This is digitalis, not marmalade." Inspector Japp, tie askew and eyes red from a night without sleep, rubbed his temples. "Poirot, we've got the bullet, the pistol, the service stare, the earring. Give me a murderer before the commissioner rings again." Poirot's smile was thin. "Patience, mon ami. The little grey cells, they do not hurry, they ferment." He turned to the tea-table, where the physical evidence lay arranged on a white damask cloth like relics in a reliquary. Poirot lifted the necklace. The broken clasp was gold, delicate, the kind that snaps under sudden force. The missing sapphire, estimated value $1,200, had not been found. "Curious," he murmured. "A thief would take all. A murderer none. Why one?" Japp snorted. "To frame someone. Percy Blaine's always skint." Poirot's eyebrow ascended. "Or to distract. Come." They descended to the lobby. Poirot demanded the guest register, the staff duty roster, the laundry ledger. He cross-referenced with the precision of a banker balancing accounts. Poirot tapped the page. "The murderer had 90 seconds from lift freeze to bolt. Enough, if the stage was set." He summoned the suspects to the Palm Court, now deserted save for the harpist tuning strings with mournful plucks. The fountain's bergamot had soured overnight. The chandeliers looked tawdry in daylight. Poirot arranged 5 chairs in a semicircle, took the centre himself. "We play a little game," he announced. "Each of you will surrender your secrets, voluntarily, or Poirot will extract them like teeth." Captain Denham went first. He laid the dispatch case on the table, clicked it open. Inside, love letters yellowed, tied with faded ribbon. Addressed to Evelyn Travers, maiden name, in Denham's own hand. Dates, 1926. Poirot lifted a letter. Ink smudged, tears. "You threatened him?" Next, Miss Frost. She opened the crimson notebook. The torn page left a jagged edge. Under Poirot's lens, indentations, midnight, roof, bring necklace. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You kept it, why?" Madame Rossi produced the opera programme. The margin note was in purple ink, her trademark. Dr. Armitage opened his crocodile bag. Inside, vials, syringes, a ledger. One entry, RH digitalis, 0.5 gra, 12 octi. Percy Blaine, hungover and sullen, turned out his pockets. Gambling IOUs totaling $12,000. A pawn ticket for a gold cigarette case, his mother's. Poirot gathered the clues like a magician palming cards. Now, the red herrings swim. He produced the missing sapphire, found at 3 a.m. in the dumb waiter shaft, wrapped in the cork silencer. He turned to Evelyn. "Madame, you struggled?" Poirot's voice softened. "The accomplice caught the bundle at 7:31, but the lift was jammed. How?" He summoned Tommy Price. The boy trembled. "Tommy, I found £50 in my locker. Note said, freeze the lift, 7:28, 45 seconds. I wedged my spare shoe. Thought it was a prank." Poirot patted his shoulder. "You were the pawn. Now, the roof." They ascended via the service stair, now fully unbricked, to the roof door. Locked, but the padlock new. Key in Tommy's pocket. On the gravelled roof, wind whipped Poirot's coat. London spread below like a map of secrets. In the corner, a coil of silk cord, a bent hairpin, a single midnight blue thread caught on a vent. Poirot. The murderer entered here, descended the service stair, entered the suite via the dumbwaiter hatch, large enough for a slight person. Shot Hargreaves, threw the bolt with the cord from the corridor, then exited the same way. The lift freeze and lights were diversions. Japp scratched his head. But the dumbwaiter hatch was bolted from inside the suite. Poirot smiled. Bolted after the murderer left. By the cord again. Observe, he demonstrated the hatch bolt operated by a second cord, looped through the ventilation grate. A pull from the corridor, snick. The hatch sealed itself. Poirot's gaze swept the suspects. Lydia Frost, 5'2", 90 pounds. Madame Rossi, voluptuous. Evelyn, willowy. Percy, lanky. Denham, broad. Armitage, stooped. A tailor's tape appeared. Lydia, 5'2". Evelyn, 5'6". The hatch, 30 inches square. He turned to the ventilation grate on the roof. 8 inches, too small. But beside it, a maintenance panel 12/6/18 screws loose. He crouched. Inside the panel, a child's footprint in dust. Size 6, Tommy bolted. Denham tackled him on the stairs. The boy sobbed. Tommy pointed a shaking finger at Lydia Frost. Poirot lifted the crimson notebook. The torn page, recovered from the dumbwaiter, matched Lydia's handwriting perfectly. Lydia lunged for the roof door. Japp caught her wrist. Silence. Even the wind paused. Poirot's voice was sorrowful. Vengeance is a dish that poisons the chef. You have confessed. Japp snapped cuffs. Lydia's grey silk tore at the shoulder. The sapphire necklace glittered on the table below like a cold blue eye. Downstairs, the reporters surged as Lydia was led out. Flashbulbs popped. Poirot paused at the revolving doors, adjusted his hat. He stepped into the morning. The Celeste's crescent moon frieze gleamed mockingly above. Another mystery solved, but the fog, as always, waited to swallow the next. Chapter 5. Complications and Twists. The fog returned at noon, thicker than before, as though London itself refused to let the Celeste Hotel scandal breathe daylight. Inside the Palm Court, the bergamot fountain had been switched off. The silence felt accusatory. The chandeliers, unlit, hung like frozen waterfalls. Only one table was occupied, a long mahogany rectangle where Hercule Poirot sat alone, arranging clues the way a pianist arranges scales before a recital. Inspector Japp burst through the revolving doors, coat dripping. "She's lawyered up," he announced. "Lydia Frost, claims duress, temporary insanity, the full music hall act." And he slapped a telegram onto the table. "Tommy Price has vanished. Uniform found in the boiler room. Blood on the collar. Real blood typo. Tommy, same as the boy." Poirot did not look up. He was balancing the missing sapphire on the lip of a sherry glass, watching it refract the grey light. "Blood is easy to spill," he murmured. "Truth is harder. Sit, Japp. We have complications." He laid out the morning's harvest. Japp groaned. "So Lydia's lying, Tommy's dead, and the Stones doing a tour of the hotel?" "Précisément. The symphony has entered its discord. We must retune." Poirot rang the service bell. Mr. Fortescue appeared, pallid, wringing his hands. The ledger was produced, 300 pages of meticulous copperplate. Poirot flipped to 12th of October. "Suite 600, 2 napkins, monogrammed C, 1 stained sherry, 1 stained ink." He traced the entry. Ink? Yet the dumb waiter napkin was blood-free. Curious. He summoned the laundry maid, a nervous girl named Gladys. Poirot's eyes glittered. "Show me." In the basement laundry, steam rolled like theatre fog. Gladys produced a wicker basket. Inside, a napkin, monogrammed C, folded into a perfect square. Poirot unfolded it. Inside, the missing sapphire, wrapped in a cork disc. The silencer. Japp scratched his chin. To retract the frame? Non, to create a second frame. Observe. He held the cork to the light. A perfect bullet hole, rimmed with dried blood. The sapphire had been lodged inside the cork when the shot was fired, dislodged by the bullet's passage, then reinserted to hide the trajectory. He climbed the dumb waiter shaft with the agility of a much younger man, Japp puffing behind. At the 6th floor hatch, the bolt was intact, but the screws on the inside hinge were stripped. He shone a torch. On the shaft wall, a fine mist of blood, upward trajectory. Japp's head spun. So not Lydia? Lydia is 5'2". The hatch is 5'8" from the corridor floor. She would need a box, but Poirot pointed to scuff marks. Size 10 boots, a man. They descended to the 5th floor. The dumb waiter hatch opened into a service corridor. Footprints in dust, large, heavy, leading to a door marked housekeeping. Inside, Tommy Price, alive, gagged, bound with bell rope, eyes wide with terror. A superficial cut on his forehead, staged. Poirot untied him. Who? Tommy pointed upward, trembling. The captain, Denham. He had the gun. Japp's handcuffs flashed. They stormed the lobby. Denham was at the bar, dispatch case open, burning letters in an ashtray. Poirot snatched a fragment. Evelyn, meet me roof, midnight, necklace. Denham's handwriting. Denham laughed, bitter. Hargreaves ruined me. Court-martial, his testimony. I lost everything. Evelyn promised to leave him, bring the necklace, seed money for a new life. When she refused, I shot through the hatch. The stone was collateral. Japp lunged. Denham sidestepped, seized a champagne bucket, swung. Ice and crystal exploded. Poirot ducked. Japp took the blow to the shoulder, went down. Denham bolted for the service stairs. Chaos. Reporters surged. Poirot pursued, surprisingly swift. Up the stairs, 4th, 5th, 6th, roof door banging open. Wind howled. Denham reached the edge, dispatch case raised like a shield. Poirot stopped 10 feet away, hands raised. Denham's face twisted. She loved me! A gust. The dispatch case slipped. Letters scattered like white birds into the fog. Denham lunged to catch them, too late. He teetered on the parapet. Poirot stepped forward. Give me your hand, Capitaine. Vengeance is finished. Denham looked down. 6 stories to flagstones. His shoulders sagged. He stepped back. Japp, limping, cuffed him. Below, in the lobby, Evelyn Hargreaves waited, veil lifted, eyes dry. She produced a packet, sealed, postmarked Ceylon, 1926. Inside, Denham's confession to forging the court-martial evidence, blackmailing Hargreaves for $20,000. Poirot bowed. Madame, you are more than you seem. Japp scratched his head. So Lydia? Lydia, released, stood pale in the lobby. I wanted him shamed, not dead. Percy Blaine, sober now, inherited $12 million and a conscience. Madame Rossi's memoir was pulped, libel. Dr. Armitage's digitalis vial proved harmless. Tommy Price got a job in the kitchen. Honest work. Poirot gathered the clues one last time. He folded the napkin around the sapphire, handed it to Evelyn. Evelyn's eyes filled. You knew? Outside, the fog lifted. Sunlight struck the Celeste's crescent moon frieze, turning it gold. Poirot stepped into a taxi. The taxi pulled away. Behind, the hotel's doors revolved, swallowing the last of the scandal. The fountain resumed its bergamot song. London moved on. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The Celeste Hotel's Grand Salon had never looked less grand. At 4 o'clock on the afternoon of 15th October 1927, the chandeliers were dimmed to a funeral amber, the palm trees drooped like mourners, and the bergamot fountain had been silenced for fear its murmur would drown the truth. Every chair was occupied. The suspects sat in a semicircle, as though awaiting judgment from a very small, very moustached deity. Hercule Poirot stood beneath the central chandelier, hands clasped behind his back, green eyes glittering like the sapphires that had started it all. Inspector Japp flanked him, notebook closed for once. He had been promised the full score in one movement. A single constable guarded the door. Outside, reporters pressed against the glass like moths against a lantern, but the revolving doors had been locked. This denouement belonged to the Celeste alone. Poirot began without preamble. Mesdames et messieurs, you have been patient. You have lied, you have forged, you have planted, you have fled. Now you will listen. The little grey cells have spoken, and they are never wrong. He paced, coat-tails flicking like a cat's. Let us reconstruct the impossible crime step by step as it truly occurred. Not the tapestry of red herrings you wove, but the single thread of truth. Poirot paused beneath the chandelier, letting silence stretch like piano wire. Not in the sapphire suite. That is the genius of the crime. The shot was fired from below, the fifth-floor dumbwaiter hatch. Gasps. Percy Blaine half rose, thought better. Evelyn Hargreaves clutched the sapphire necklace, now reassembled, -1 stone. Poirot continued. Observe the physics. The dumbwaiter shaft is vertical. The hatch on 6 is 5'8" from the corridor floor. On 5, it is 5'2". Captain Denham, 6'1", former naval gunnery officer, stands in the 5th-floor service corridor. He has climbed the service stair, unbricked weeks earlier. He opens the hatch with a duplicate key, copied from the housekeeper's ring. He inserts the .25 Beretta, barrel wrapped in cork and cotton wool. The cork is pierced. Inside, the missing sapphire, wedged to muffle sound and catch the bullet's spin. He produced the cork disc, bullet hole center, sapphire-shaped indentation. The shot is fired upward at a 45-degree angle. The bullet travels 3 feet, passes through the open hatch on 6, enters Reginald Hargreaves's chest as he stands at the dumbwaiter, summoning fresh napkins perhaps, or investigating a noise. The cork catches the sapphire as it is torn from Evelyn's necklace during her instinctive grab. The sound a pop like champagne. The digitalis in Evelyn's sherry, administered earlier by Denham disguised as a waiter, keeps her docile. Madame Rossi's hand flew to her throat. Disguised? Poirot nodded. A false moustache, a borrowed jacket. The staff are too busy to notice one more waiter. Denham wraps pistol, cork and sapphire in a Celeste napkin, monogram C. He drops the bundle down the shaft to Tommy Price, waiting in the kitchen dumbwaiter. Tommy catches it at 7:31, stuffs it in his locker, and runs to discover the body. He turned to the lift boy, pale but unharmed. Tommy then stages his own disappearance. Pig's blood on his collar, uniform in the boiler room, to buy time, but the net closed too fast. Japp opened his mouth. Poirot raised a hand. 7:31 p.m. The bolt. Denham, still on 5, loops a silk cord through the ventilation grate above the 6th-floor hatch. A pull, snick, the bolt slides home. The hatch itself is bolted from the corridor side with a second cord. The room is sealed. Denham descends the service stair, emerges in the lobby at 7:33, cool as you please, and orders another whiskey. Denham surged to his feet. Lies! I was in the bar! Poirot produced a whiskey glass. Fingerprint dust still clinging. Your glass, Capitaine. The barman served you at 7:20. You left at 7:26, confirmed by the cloakroom girl who took your coat. You returned at 7:35, coat damp with fog. 9 minutes unaccounted. Enough. Denham's shoulders sagged. Poirot turned to Lydia Frost. "Mademoiselle, you are the tragic chorus. You forged the IOUs, planted the earring, tore the page from your notebook, indentations recovered by ultraviolet light. He ruined her. Your sister, yes, but you did not fire the shot. You merely salted the wound." Lydia's eyes filled. "I wanted him exposed. Instead, you muddied the waters. The love letters, Denham's forgeries, his stationery, his ink, the court-martial. Hargreaves was bribed to testify, but by Denham's own commander, Denham took the fall to protect a friend. He blamed Hargreaves ever since." Denham laughed hollow. £20,000 to keep quiet. I needed Evelyn to run with me. New life salon. She refused. The necklace was plan B. Poirot faced Evelyn. "Madam, you knew?" Evelyn's voice was steel. "I suspected. The letters in his case, too convenient. I staged the bruises, kept the real blackmail note, postmarked Ceylon, Denham's confession. I burned his forgeries in his room while you chased shadows." She laid the Ceylon packet on the table. Wax seal intact. Poirot bowed. "A performance worthy of Madame Rossi." The diva snorted. "I merely sang scales." Dr. Armitage adjusted his monocle. "And the digitalis?" "Denham's. Stolen from your bag during your Kensington consultation. Your bag left in the cloakroom. You prescribed it for Hargreaves's angina. He refused to take it. Denham used it to dull Evelyn." Percy Blaine, heir to millions, spoke for the first time. "So Uncle Reggie was a cad. Oui, but not a murderer, only a fool for love and sapphires." Poirot gathered the clues like a conjurer, revealing the final card. He turned to Denham. "Capitaine, you planned a perfect crime, but perfection is impossible when the heart is impure. You loved Madame, yet you would frame her. You hated Hargreaves, yet you became him, a liar, a thief, a killer." Denham's voice cracked. "I just wanted what was mine." Japp snapped the cuffs. Denham did not resist. Poirot addressed the room. The impossible crime was never impossible, only improbably clever. The room was locked, yes, but the bullet flew through a shaft, not a wall. The murderer never entered the suite, only his hatred did. He bowed. "Messieurs et mesdames, the curtain falls." The chandeliers blazed to full brightness. The fountain resumed its song. Outside, the fog had lifted entirely. Sunlight poured through the revolving doors as they spun open, admitting the press in a hurricane of flashbulbs. Poirot slipped away before the questions began. In the lobby, he paused beneath the crescent moon frieze, adjusted his hat, and murmured to no one. Another knot untied, but the threads of human folly, they are endless. A taxi waited. He climbed in, closed the door, and was gone before the first headline hit the pavement. In the Grand Salon, Evelyn Hargreaves laid the necklace on the table. "Sell it," she said to Fortescue. "Every penny to a home for girls like Lydia's sister." Lydia Frost wept silently. Madame Rossi began to hum Visidate. Percy Blaine ordered champagne for everyone. Dr. Armitage closed his bag and, for the first time in years, smiled. The Celeste Hotel, blood-stained but unbowed, prepared for its next gala. Some secrets, after all, are best served with oysters and Strauss. Chapter 7. Justice Served. The Celeste Hotel woke on 16th October 1927 to a sky the colour of polished steel. Overnight, the fog had vanished as completely as Captain Marcus Denham's reputation. Sunlight struck the white facade, glanced off the crescent moon frieze, and poured through the revolving doors in bright, unforgiving blades. The lobby fountain sang bergamot again, but the scent now carried a faint undernote of printer's ink. Every newspaper in London had splashed the Celeste across its front page. Inside the Grand Salon, the mahogany table had been cleared of clues and laid for breakfast. Silver domes gleamed. The string quartet, rehearsing for tonight's gala, played a gentle arrangement of Debussy's Clair de Lune. The chandeliers, restored to full wattage, scattered prisms across the marble like spilled diamonds. Yet the room felt hollow, as though the scandal had sucked the air from it and left only echoes. Hercule Poirot entered at 9 sharp, immaculate in charcoal pinstripes and a tie the colour of absinthe. He carried no notebook, only a single white rose, which he laid beside Evelyn Hargreaves's plate. She looked up, eyes red-rimmed but steady. Evelyn touched the petals. "You gave me justice, monsieur. I give you breakfast." She lifted a dome. Eggs en cocotte with truffles, toast points, a pot of café au lait. Poirot's moustache twitched in approval. He sat. Across the table, Inspector Japp attacked a plate of kippers with the enthusiasm of a man who had slept 3 hours in 48. "Denham's confessed," he said between mouthfuls. "Full statement, signed at dawn. Attempted theft, murder 1, conspiracy. He'll hang. Tommy Price gets 5 years for accessory. Judge'll go light. Boy's mother's in hospital." Poirot sipped his coffee. "And the others?" Japp wiped his mouth. "Lydia Frost, charged with forgery and obstruction. Suspended sentence. She's to run the new charity home Evelyn's funding. Percy Blaine's selling the shipping line. Lock, stock, and Ming vases to Cunard. Madame Rossi's memoir's been pulped. She's off to Milan tomorrow. Dr. Armitage's digitalis vial was sugar water. Placebo. He's retired to the Cotswolds." He leaned back. "Clean rap, Poirot. Even the commissioner's happy." Poirot's smile was small. "Clean? Non. Justice is never clean. It is orderly, and order has been restored." He rose, crossed to the fountain, and dropped a coin into the water. A Belgian franc 1927 mint. The ripples caught the light like tiny sapphires. At 10 o'clock, the suspects, now witnesses, gathered one last time in the sapphire suite. The Persian rug had been sent for cleaning. Chalk outlines lingered like ghosts. The French windows stood open. A crisp breeze carried the scent of wet leaves from the courtyard below. The dumb waiter hatch was sealed with police tape. The bolt gleamed, newly polished, as though nothing had ever slid home with a murderous snick. Captain Denham entered first, wrists cuffed, flanked by 2 constables. His naval bearing had crumbled. The scar above his eye stood livid against prison pallor. He did not look at the room where he had planned perfection and achieved ruin. Evelyn, veiled in black lace, stood by the balcony. She did not turn. Denham flinched as though struck. The constables led him out. The door closed with the finality of a coffin lid. Lydia Frost came next, grey silk replaced by a plain navy dress. Her auburn hair was loose, framing a face stripped of secretary severity. She carried a small valise. Poirot inclined his head. "Redemption, mademoiselle, is the only ledger that never balances. Begin it well." She hesitated, then offered her hand. Poirot took it. Cool, steady, she left. The corridor swallowed her footsteps. Madame Rossi swept in, emeralds replaced by pearls, gown the colour of storm clouds. She pressed a ticket into his hand. First night, La Scala. Poirot tucked it into his waistcoat with a bow. Dr. Armitage entered last, crocodile bag swapped for a modest Gladstone. He looked 10 years younger. Percy Blaine lingered in the doorway, heir to millions and suddenly unsure where to put his hands. Percy laughed, the sound bright and boyish. He saluted with 2 fingers and was gone. At 11, the press was admitted. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire. Poirot stood on the grand staircase, a small figure against marble infinity. He refused more questions, descending the stairs with the dignity of a monarch. At the bottom, Mr. Fortescue waited, eyes damp. Fortescue managed a watery smile. Booked solid through Christmas. Outside, a taxi idled. Poirot paused beneath the porte-cochere. The commissionaire, medals gleaming, snapped a salute. Poirot touched his hat. Tell him honesty is the only uniform that never wears out. He climbed in. The taxi pulled away from Bruton Street, merging with the stream of London traffic. Omnibuses, hansoms, a Rolls-Royce the colour of midnight peonies. Poirot leaned back, closed his eyes. The taxi turned into Piccadilly. Behind, the Celeste Hotel shrank to a white wedge against the sky, its crescent moon frieze catching the sun like a promise, or a warning. The Girls' Refuge of St. Sapphira opened in a quiet square in Bloomsbury. Its sign was simple. A sapphire blue door, brass knocker shaped like a crescent moon. Inside, Lydia Frost kept accounts in her crimson notebook, now filled with neat columns of donations and expenditures. The first resident, a girl of 16, abandoned pregnant, named her daughter Evelyn. In Milan, Madame Rossi took 12 curtain calls for Tosca. Critics wrote, "Never has Visitate sounded so lived." Percy Blaine's Vineyard produced its first vintage, Cuvée Celeste, 1927. The label showed a ship sailing under a crescent moon. It sold out in an hour. Dr. Armitage's Roses won first prize at the Cotswolds Show. Digital is free. Tommy Price, paroled early for good behaviour, became the Celeste's headlift attendant. Guests tipped him generously. He saved every shilling for his mother's nursing care. Captain Denham awaited trial in Wormwood Scrubs. His cell window faced east. At dawn, the light reminded him of Ceylon. He would never see it again. Evelyn Hargreaves sailed for New York on the Mauretania, first class, alone. In her cabin, she opened a small velvet box. Inside, the 36 remaining sapphires, restrung on platinum. She pinned the necklace at her throat, looked in the mirror, and smiled. Not the smile of a widow, but of a woman who had chosen her own horizon. And in Brussels, Hercule Poirot received a parcel. Inside, a single bottle of Cuvée Celeste, 1927, a La Scala programme signed "To the Little Man Who Hears Music in Murder, Valentina," and a photograph of a blue door in Bloomsbury. On the back, in Lydia's precise hand, "The book's balance, thank you." Poirot placed the gifts on his mantelpiece beside a white rose pressed flat in glass. He poured a glass of the wine, raised it to the empty room. He drank. Outside, snow began to fall. Soft, deliberate, covering London's scars with a clean white page. The Celeste Hotel's lights blazed on. 7 stories of marble and memory. The Sapphire Suite welcomed its first post-scandal guests. A honeymoon couple from Buenos Aires, blissfully unaware that the bolts still gleamed with stories it would never tell. In the lobby, the fountain sang Bergamot. The quartet played Strauss. And somewhere, in the hush between notes, a small Belgian detective smiled, because somewhere else, another impossible crime was waiting to be born. And so, the curtain falls on the Celeste Hotel. Poirot departs, order restored, but the echoes linger. If you've been with us through every twist, locked rooms, sapphire bullets, midnight blue threads, then like, subscribe, ring the bell. Next week, Murder on the Nile, but with a crocodile you'll never see coming. Tell me in the comments, who did you suspect at the end? And where are you listening from tonight? Until then, keep your doors bolted and your little grey cells sharp. Chapter 8. Echoes in the Celeste. Tudor 123. 2,000 words exactly. The Celeste Hotel never truly closed its doors on the Hargreaves affair. By the spring of 1928, The scandal had calcified into legend, the way pearls form around grit. Guests booked the Sapphire Suite not for its sycamore panelling or gold dolphin taps, but for the shiver of stepping where a man had died behind a bolt thrown by an invisible hand. The management, shrewd Mr. Fortescue at the helm, installed a discreet brass plaque beside the door. Site of the impossible crime, solved by H. Poirot. 15 24 Reservations tripled. Chapter 8. Echoes in the Celeste. The Celeste in April 1928 was a different beast. The lobby fountain still sang bergamot, but the scent now mingled with lilacs from the courtyard window boxes. The chandeliers, newly rewired after the infamous flicker, blazed with twice the wattage, as though light could banish shadows. The string quartet had been replaced by a jazz trio. The harpist had retired to Bournemouth. The Sapphire Suite plaque gleamed nightly under the passage of curious fingers. At 7:15 p.m. on 14th of April, the revolving doors spun and admitted a figure who had not been seen in London since the trial. Evelyn Hargreaves, no longer in mourning black, but in a gown of emerald silk that made the sapphires at her throat look almost modest. She carried a small crocodile case and a smile that had learned new currencies. The commissionaire, still the ex-guardsman, medals polished, snapped to attention. The clerk's eyebrows rose, but the register was signed with a flourish. E. Hargreaves, New York. The lift, now operated by Tommy Price, cap regulation, smile regulation, ascended smoothly to the 6th floor. No freezes tonight. In Brussels, Hercule Poirot received a telegram at his Rue de la Montagne apartment. The paper was heavy, the handwriting Evelyn's looping elegance. Poirot twirled his moustache, considered the white rose pressed in glass on his mantle, and booked the next boat train. At 8 p.m., the Sapphire Suite was transformed. The Persian rug, cleaned, but the faint outline of chalk lingered like a watermark, had been rolled back. A table for two stood beneath the chandelier, set with Sèvres porcelain and a single white rose in a silver bud vase. The French windows were open to the courtyard. Lilacs breathed cool sweetness. The dumb waiter hatch was sealed with a new brass plate engraved, In Memoriam R.H. The bolt gleamed, but a tiny scratch, Poirot's old clue, had been left untouched, a deliberate scar. Evelyn greeted Poirot in the doorway, sapphires flashing. He presented a bottle, Cuvée Celeste, 1927, Percy Blaine's first vintage. Evelyn laughed, the sound bright as champagne. They dined on sole meunière and asparagus, the jazz trio audible through the open windows. Between courses, Evelyn laid a velvet pouch on the table. Poirot lifted it to the light. Flawless, cold, heavy with memory. She produced a letter, yellowed, postmarked Naples, 1926. Denham's handwriting, but the ink faded. Poirot read aloud, If she won't come willingly, the necklace will. 1 bullet, 1 fortune. Forgive me, Evelyn. History repeats, first as tragedy, then as theft. Poirot folded the letter. She opened the crocodile case. Inside, a deed stamped and sealed. Poirot's eyes softened. Redemption, madame, is the rarest gem. At 9:30, the jazz trio struck up After You've Gone. Evelyn crossed to the French windows, looked down at the courtyard. The lilacs were in full bloom. A couple strolled beneath them, oblivious to history. She turned the bolt. Snick! The sound echoed, softer now, almost gentle. Evelyn smiled, unclasped the sapphire necklace, and laid it on the tea table beside the white rose. It. Poirot bowed. A fitting epilogue. At 10 quart, Poirot descended to the lobby. The necklace, now 35 stones, hung in a glass case beside the fountain, spotlit, with a discreet plaque. Tommy Price held the lift door. In the palm court, Percy Blaine raised a glass of his own vintage. Madame Rossi's voice drifted from a gramophone in the bar. Vici recorded live in Milan. Dr. Armitage sent a postcard from the Cotswolds. A prize rose, digitalis free. Lydia Frost arrived at closing, valise in hand, to collect the necklace's display key. She paused beneath the chandelier. Poirot nodded, memory roots deep. At 11, Poirot stepped into the April night. The fog was gentle now, a lace curtain. A taxi waited, same driver who had taken him from the Celeste 6 months earlier. He looked up, the sapphire suite windows glowed softly. Evelyn stood on the balcony, emerald gown catching the moon. She raised a hand, not a wave, but a benediction. Poirot raised his hat. The taxi pulled away. The Celeste's legend grew. The sapphire suite plaque became a pilgrimage site. Guests left white roses on the tea table. The maid collected them nightly. The necklace in the lobby case drew crowds. The 36th sapphire, recut, perfect, hung in the girls' refuge, above the fireplace where Lydia Frost read stories to children who would never know their grandmother's grief. Evelyn Hargreaves opened a gallery in Manhattan, Sapphire and Memory, specializing in Art Deco jewels with stories. Her first exhibition, the Celeste Collection, sold out. Percy Blaine's Vineyard thrived. Cuvée Celeste, 1928, won gold in Paris. He married the lilac grower's daughter. Tommy Price became head concierge, known for honesty and the perfect lift smile. And in Brussels, Hercule Poirot added a new treasure to his mantle. A tiny brass bolt, scratched, polished, engraved on the back in Evelyn's hand. He poured a glass of Cuvée Celeste, raised it to the white rose in glass. Outside, Brussels snow fell, soft as forgiveness. In London, the Celeste's lights blazed on, 7 stories of marble and memory, the fountain singing bergamot into a night that finally truly belonged to the living. And so the Celeste closes its ledger on the Hargreaves affair, not with a murder, but with a beginning. If you followed every sapphire, every lie, every lilac-scented epilogue, then like, subscribe, ring the bell. Next week the body in the library, but the library's on a train and the body's not dead. Yet. Tell me in the comments, what would you leave on the sapphire suite tea table? And where are you listening from tonight? Until then, keep your bolts scratched and your hearts unlatched. Chapter 9. The Final Bolt. The Celeste Hotel, on the first anniversary of the Hargreaves murder, of 14th October 1928, stood dressed in its finest contradictions. By day, it was all crisp autumn light and brass polish. By night, it became a lantern of memory, every window glowing like a confession. The lobby fountain had been refitted with a hidden mechanism. Every hour, on the hour, it released a single white rose petal that drifted across the bergamot-scented water before vanishing. Guests called it the ghost petal. Children tried to catch it. No one ever did. At 7:15 p.m. precisely, the revolving doors admitted a party of 5. They moved with the synchrony of people who had rehearsed this entrance in dreams. They did not speak in the lobby. They did not need to. The commissionaire saluted. The lift, newly installed, silent as a whisper, rose to the 6th floor. The corridor's midnight blue carpet had been replaced with a deeper indigo, the lotus sconces now electric, steady. Door 600 stood ajar, exhaling lilac and candlelight. Inside the sapphire suite, the transformation was complete. The Persian rug was gone. Pale oak flooring reflected the chandelier like a frozen lake. The bed had been removed. In its place, a circular table set for 5, draped in white linen. The French windows were open to the courtyard, where a single lilac tree, planted by the refuge girls, stood in defiant bloom despite the season. The dumb waiter hatch was gone, bricked over, painted the same twilight sycamore as the walls. The bolt remained, but now it was gold-plated, engraved with a tiny crescent moon. A brass switch beside the door controlled every light in the room. Evelyn entered first. She crossed to the bolt, touched it reverently. She threw it back. The sound was softer now, almost a sigh. Percy uncorked the magnum. The cork popped like a distant gunshot. Tommy poured one glass, set it at the empty place. Lydia opened the cedar box. Inside, the 36th sapphire, recut into a perfect heart, set in a silver pendant shaped like a key. Poirot laid the white rose on the table. It landed beside a small brass plaque none of them had seen before, set into the wood. Evelyn's eyes filled. She lifted the pendant, fastened it around Lydia's neck. Lydia touched the sapphire. "It's warm." They sat. The jazz trio, now a quintet, played from the courtyard below, stardust drifting up like incense. Tommy served sole, asparagus, a single white truffle shaved over each plate. Percy poured the wine. Poirot raised his glass. They drank. The wine was perfect. Sun and grapes and forgiveness. At Étoile, the lights dimmed without touch. The chandelier flickered, once, twice, like the night of the murder. The quintet paused mid-phrase. A collective breath held. Then the lights steadied. The music resumed. But on the table, the white rose had turned pink at the edges, as though kissed by invisible lips. Evelyn laughed, shaky. The ghost petal's cousin. At 9 Wheel they moved to the balcony. London spread below, a constellation of gas and electric. The lilac tree's shadow stretched across the courtyard flagstones, shaped unmistakably like a bolt. Percy leaned on the rail. "I used to think money bought freedom. Turns out it buys lilacs." Lydia stood beside him. "And doors that open for girls who've never had one." Tommy checked his watch. "Shift starts in 30. The lift's waiting." He produced a small velvet pouch, poured its contents into his palm. 5 brass keys, identical, each, engraved with a crescent moon. He distributed the keys. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she closed hers in her fist. At 10 Fougue, they descended. The lobby was empty save for the fountain and the necklace in its case. The 35 stones caught the light like a frozen heartbeat. Evelyn opened the case, added the heart-shaped pendant beside it. The display now read, "Tommy locked the case." The click echoed. At 11 the quintet played "After You've Gone." The 5 stood beneath the chandelier, hands linked in a circle around the table. The white rose, now fully pink, lay in the centre. Nothing happened. Then the chandelier blazed to full brilliance. The fountain released a single white petal that floated upward, against gravity, hovered above the rose, and dissolved into light. The circle broke. No one spoke. They did not need to. At midnight, they left separately. Tommy to the lift, cap back on, smile regulation. Lydia to Bloomsbury, cedar box empty, heart full. Percy to the vineyard, magnum under his arm, lilacs in his future. Evelyn to the Mauritania, sapphire heart pendant now around her own neck. Poirot to the station, white rose in his buttonhole, pink at the edges. The Celeste's lights dimmed to a single glow in the sapphire suite. The bolt remained open. The door did not close again that night. 14th of October, 1977. The vault key turned in the refuge basement. A girl, Rose's granddaughter named Celeste, opened the cedar box. Inside, photographs yellowed, confession brittle, cork cracked, napkin monogrammed, sea faded to grey. And a note in Poirot's precise hand, dated 1928. She read the story aloud to the refugee girls. They planted a lilac tree in the courtyard. It bloomed out of season. In Manhattan, Evelyn's gallery, now run by her niece, displayed the necklace annually on 14th of October. The heart pendant hung beside it, warm to the touch. In Bordeaux, Cuvée Celeste 1927 fetched $10,000 a bottle at auction. The label now read, "Unbolted by Time." In the Cotswolds, Dr. Armitage's roses still won prizes. The digitalis bed had been replaced with white blooms. And in the Celeste, now a listed building, the sapphire suite was preserved exactly as 1928. The gold bolt gleamed. The brass switch controlled lights that never flickered. Guests left white roses on the table. Every year, on 14th October, one turned pink by morning. The fountain still released its ghost petal. Children still failed to catch it. But sometimes late at night, the concierge, Tommy's grandson, swore he heard 5 voices in the lift shaft, laughing softly, saying "un, deux, trois," before the doors closed on silence. And so the final bolt slides home, not to lock, but to liberate. The Celeste keeps its secrets, but shares its truth with those who listen. If you've stayed through every petal, every key, every pink-edged rose, then like, subscribe, ring the bell. This was our longest night. Thank you for keeping the lights on. Tell me in the comments, what would you leave in the Sapphire Suite Vault? And where are you listening from tonight? Until the next impossible crime, keep your doors open, your hearts unbolted, and your little grey cells pink with possibility. Chapter 10. The Unbolted Door. The Celeste Hotel, on the night of 14th October 1929, 2 years to the hour since Reginald Hargreaves fell, stood not in triumph but in quiet vigil. London outside was all jazz and motor cars, but inside the lobby, time had folded back on itself. The bergamot fountain released its ghost petal at the stroke of 7. The chandeliers dimmed to the exact amber of 1927. The midnight blue carpet, replaced annually, felt softer underfoot, as though it remembered every footstep of the original investigation. The Sapphire Suite plaque had been joined by a second, smaller one. At 7:15 p.m., the revolving doors admitted not 5 figures, but 1. Hercule Poirot, alone, coat unbuttoned for the first time in public memory. White rose in his lapel, now fully pink. He carried a small leather case and a smile that had travelled through every shade of satisfaction. The commissionaire, Tommy Price's grandson, name badge reading T. Price III, snapped a salute sharp enough to cut fog. Poirot's eyebrow ascended. All? The lift rose in silence. The corridor sconces flickered once, deliberate, programmed. Door 600 stood open. Inside, candlelight, lilac, the circular table set for 6, 5 chairs occupied, and in the 5th chair, empty until now, sat Rose, the refuge girl, now 17, wearing the heart-shaped sapphire pendant like a medal. Poirot paused in the doorway. The room exhaled. Evelyn crossed to him, took his coat. Percy uncorked the magnum. The cork popped, pop, echoing the fatal champagne sound. Tommy poured into the single glass, set it at the empty place. Lydia opened the cedar box. Inside, the original police photographs, now sepia. Denham's confession, edges curled, the cork silencer cracked but intact, the napkin, monogram C faded to ghost. And atop it all, a new addition, a child's drawing, stick figures holding hands beneath a crescent moon, crayon lilacs blooming. Rose, 17, eyes old, touched the drawing. Poirot laid his leather case on the table, opened it. Inside, 5 brass keys, now patinated green with age, and a single white rose pressed between glass plates, pink at the edges. They sat. The jazz quintet, now a sextet, played from the courtyard below. Moonlight serenade, new but fitting. Tommy served oysters, caviar, a single white truffle shaved over each plate. Percy poured the wine. Poirot raised his glass. They drank. The wine was perfection, sun, grapes, and 2 years of healing. At 8 the lights dimmed without touch. The chandelier flickered, once, twice, thrice, like the original murder night. The sextet paused. A collective breath held. Then the lights steadied. But on the table, the pressed rose had turned fully pink, petals unfurling as though alive. The ghost petal rose from the fountain below, drifted through the open windows, hovered above the table, and dissolved into pink light that settled on the cedar box. Evelyn laughed. Tears bright. The Celeste approves. At 9:00 they moved to the balcony. London below was a necklace of lights. The lilac tree, now 2 planted by refuge girls, stood in full, impossible bloom. Their shadow on the flagstones formed a perfect heart. Percy leaned on the rail. "The vineyard's yours, Rose. When you're 21, Percy Blaine Trust." Rose's eyes widened. I can't?" Tommy checked his pocket watch. Gold, gift from the hotel. He produced a small velvet pouch, poured its contents into his palm. 6 brass keys, identical, each engraved with a crescent moon and a date. 1927, 1928, 1929, and 3 blank. He distributed the keys. Rose's fingers closed around hers like a promise. At 10 sous, they descended. The lobby was transformed. The necklace case now held 36 sapphires and the heart pendant, arranged in a perfect circle. A new plaque read, "Evelyn opened the case, added the pressed pink rose between glass plates." The display glowed. Tommy locked the case. The click echoed like a heartbeat. At 11 sous, the sextet played Stardust. The 6 stood beneath the chandelier, hands linked around the table. The pink rose lay in the centre, petals now fully open. They reached for the gold bolt, fingers overlapping. The chandelier blazed. The fountain released a cascade of white petals that rose upward, swirled around the table, and settled into a perfect circle around the rose. The lilac trees below bloomed brighter, scent flooding the room. The circle broke. No one spoke. They did not need to. Rose to the refuge, cedar box in her arms, heart pendant warm. Lydia to Bloomsbury, silver hair catching moonlight. Percy to Bordeaux, magnum under his arm, vineyard in his blood. Tommy to the lobby, cap back on, smile eternal. Evelyn to the Queen Mary, sapphire choker gleaming, New York waiting. Poirot to the station, pink rose in his buttonhole, case lighter. The Celeste's lights dimmed to a single glow in the sapphire suite. The bolt remained open. The door did not close again that night, or any night after. 14th October 2027. The Celeste Hotel, now a museum, opens the vault for the centenary. A girl, Celeste's great-granddaughter, named Sapphire, turns the final key. Inside, photographs, confession, cork, napkin, and a century of additions. Children's drawings, refuge ledgers, vineyard labels, jazz programs, a pressed pink rose that never fades. The Sapphire Suite is preserved exactly as 1929. The gold bolt gleams. The brass switch controls lights that never flicker. Guests leave white roses. Every year, on 14th October, one turns pink by morning. The fountain still releases its ghost petal. Children still fail to catch it. But sometimes late at night, the concierge, Tommy Price's great-grandson, hears 6 voices in the yacht lift shaft, laughing softly, saying, 1, 2, 3, before the doors close on eternity. The necklace, 36 sapphires and the heart, hangs in the lobby, spotlit. The plaque reads, "And in Brussels, in a small museum dedicated to Hercule Poirot, a single exhibit. A white rose pressed between glass, pink at the edges, labelled, 'Visitors touch the glass.' Some swear the petals move. And so the final bolt slides home. Not to lock, but to liberate forever. The Celeste keeps its circle, and the story walks through every open door. If you've stayed through every petal, every key, every pink rose across a century, then like, subscribe, ring the bell. This was our longest journey. Thank you for walking it with us. Tell me in the comments, what would you add to the Celeste Vault in 2027? And where are you listening from tonight? Until the next impossible circle, keep your doors unbolted, your hearts in bloom, and your little grey cells pink with wonder.